Yeah, this will be the final pages of the commercial car commercial lease agreement and some additional information.
Perfect. All right. You can take it away, Michelle.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I know we're very close to the holidays, so it's nice to see you all. And if you have any questions, you can stop and ask or put them in the chat box if you don't have a mic, and we'll address them. Okay, so we are starting on page 4. We left off at page 3 last time. So the estoppel certificates. So the tenant shall execute and return a tenancy statement, which we call estoppel, delivered to the tenant by the landlord or landlord's agents within 3 days after its receipt. Sometimes if a building is up for sale or anything like that, then the new lender will require these estoppels. So when you deliver estoppels, if you are drafting for the landlord, please have email documentation on those estoppel drafts. Even if you have the lease agreements, that the landlord has reviewed them and concurs with what is in the statements. The landlord will also sign the estoppel certificate, but you want to have track that they were asked to review it, because sometimes if leases are old, maybe all the paperwork or upper on the rents wasn't included. At any rate, make sure that the landlord does go ahead and review those. They will obtain the tenant's signature and they will also sign it. Okay. We went over tenant estoppel on a prior training, so I won't pull that up. I can pull it up at the end just to show you, to refresh your memory real quick. So if the landlord indeed does transfer the building, then the tenant agrees that the transferee of landlord's interest shall be substituted as the landlord under this agreement. It should not, and they'll also transfer the security deposit, and it should not affect the lease in place for the tenant. Okay, so that goes along with subordination. The agreement shall be subordinate to all existing liens at landlord's option. However, this should not be interrupting the tenant's quiet possession of the premises, and the lease that is in place will remain in place. Okay, so tenant representation credit. The tenant warrants, very important that all the statements in their financial documents and their application are accurate. It also authorizes the landlord or their broker to obtain the tenant's credit report at time of application. You remember when we looked at the application, you make sure that your client or the tenant has signed the bottom of the application, because most entities that are running credit reports need that signature to run the tenant's credit. So they're going to want to see that on the application, that they have signed that it is okay for them to be running the credit. 34 requires that you check some boxes. So construction related accessibility standards. It could be an ADA bathroom or things of that nature. So landlord states the premise has or has not been inspected by certified access specialist. Usually here in most, I'd say 90% of the leases, it has not. And if it has, then the premises has or has not been determined to meet all applicable construction related accessibility standards. There's also a disclosure on this that will roll in next, but on number 34, it's usually checked has not inspected by CAS. So just pay attention to block number 34, be speaking to your landlord about that as well. And there is a disclosure on it that I'll show you at the end of this. So dispute resolution, this is the same as the, almost the same as on the residential contracts. The mediation provision applies whether or not arbitration provision is initialed below. So if the clients, the landlord and the tenant, initial the arbitration, they are initialing to agree to have disputes arising out of the matters included in the arbitration of disputes decided by a neutral arbitration. So if they initial this, it's just like our you know, our residential contracts that we're all used to, same thing, but just bear in mind that mediation does apply, whether it's initialed or not, okay?
Question.
Yes. So to speak into the, Jeffrey has a question, he's coming up to speak.
You can scroll down.
Go up.
Yeah, number 33.
Where?
Number 33.
33.
Tenant presentation of credit, question report. How about if the prospective tenant is a corporate entity, or it's a corporate entity, like a church? How do you obtain the credit report on an entity?
Okay, I can answer and then Peter or Ruben can jump in. So if the tenant is an entity, is your question, how do you obtain the credit report? So what we normally do is we have a business application or a corporate application, and we also have an individual application. So we have the individual, and you'll see at the back of the lease, there is a space for the guarantor to sign. We are running credit on the guarantor who will guarantee this lease, not on the corporation. We are not on the entity because it could be an LLC. We're running on the guarantor of the lease, which there is a box at the back of this document where the guarantor could sign. So we do not run the entity credit, we're running the individual guarantor. So you always, I think we went over a little bit of this last week, but let me back up a little bit. When it is an entity, you always want to make sure that you're looking on the California Secretary of State side if they have not provided you information on the entity, like you can pull their documentation there. If you don't know how, I'll show you. I learned something new every day in this business. If it's a LTD, Peter can address this more, but I was digging around yesterday, like, why can't I find this? Well, LTD limited, if it's a corporation, comma, LTD limited, they're overseas. So you're not going to find their documentation in the Secretary of State site. What you do is you ask the tenant for it so that you have it to show to the landlord, or you ask their agent. Peter, do you have anything to add, or Ruben?
Yes, you're right, Michelle. You really have limited information on the entity or corporation or LLC, for that matter. All you can do is go to the Secretary of State website and find out whether they are a viable company, whether they have been suspended, or whether they are active. And then you can get the statement of information about who's authorized to sign. And other than that, you cannot get any financial information out of the Secretary of State site. And if it is not a public listed company, you really can't get their financials data too much. But if it is listed, then you can always go to the website and get their published financial information. But anyhow, when you are leasing it to a corporation, you should always get personal guarantee if the company is not publicly listed. Because for a small company, it's very easy for them to go bankrupt, and once they go bankrupt, there's nothing you can do, because it's limited liability. But you can always, if you have a personal guarantor, you can always go after the personal guarantor for delinquent rent or whatever damages that that incur. So and also mentioned that about the Michelle mentioned about the LTD, which is the limited company limited, and it's usually for company in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Asia country, and or the European country. But in US, we don't have the LTD, but nevertheless, they should, if they have an LTD and then they are doing business in California, they should be registered in the Secretary of State, and then as some company operating in California. So you can ask them if you want to get more information.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So there, as far as due diligence, if you're trying to find out about a company's history or reference. You could also do searches through the Better Business Bureau. And then if they have a Dun and Brad score, that's like equivalent to a Social Security FICO scores for an individual and stuff. Furthermore, nowadays it's a lot easier for us to find out about companies because of the web. You know, you can easily Google a company and find out if they're legitimate or not. Pretty much it's like a resume for everybody, you know. So if you're trying to do your due diligence and it's not like a big publicly traded company, there's other methods of just determining the legitimacy of the corporation and stuff. So just food for thought.
Those are very good points. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move along. We just finished the arbitration clause, which most of us that have been in business a while are pretty familiar with. Joint and individual obligations. So if there's more than one tenant, each one is individually and completely responsible for performance of all obligations under this agreement. Meaning if there was two people that signed the lease and one disappeared or something, the other one is still responsible to pay all of the rent and any other obligations they have under that lease agreement. So hopefully most partners that do that and sign together know that, but that's just telling them here in number 36, okay? So 37 is really important because notices that people may need to serve, like the landlord may need to communicate with the tenant or vice versa. So we like these boxes filled out. So the notices may be served by mail, fax, or courier at the following address or location, or any other location that they subsequently designate. So please, agents, make sure that both of these boxes are adequately filled out with the name, the address, the zip code, all of that, so that if any landlord or tenant needs to deliver a notice to each other, they do have this notice box filled out. This should never be left blank. We need to have that filled out, okay? So notice is deemed effective off of these addresses upon the earliest of the following: personal receipt by either party or their agent, written acknowledgement of notice, or 5 days after mailing the notice to such location by first class mail or prepaid, postage prepaid. So that outlines when notice took place. So please don't leave these blank. I've seen it a lot of times where they are blank. They are very important boxes, okay? Tenant shall indemnify, defend, and hold landlord harmless from all claims, disputes, litigation, judgments, and attorney fees arising out of tenant's use of the premises. So if they were doing something in there that the landlord wasn't aware, or, you know, that should indemnify the landlord. It's just a clause that's in here. And if we go to other terms and conditions and supplements, here's what I talked about last week. If you have other things to add, let's say you want to add in here, like maybe there's some tenant improvement money, or landlord shall deliver unit professionally cleaned or broom swept, any other additional terms. Normally broom swept you're not going to put in there because you're going to make sure that's done before. But let's say the landlord was giving some rental rebate, you could add that in here, like 1 month free rent, and stipulate what month it is. And remember, just because the landlord gives 1 month free, you need to make sure that you add in there the tenant shall pay all utilities or CAM fees if that's applicable, okay? So 1 month is base rent free rent. It's not including all of the utilities. So if you're doing a term like that, make sure you just say base rent, tenant shall be responsible for all utilities and CAM fees during rental abatement period. So you want to add that. Also, if the landlord had agreed to provide a little fund, maybe some, what have I seen? Outlets need to be updated for the internet, and maybe the landlord's being gracious and they're willing to do it. So you could put that in there, that landlord shall complete updating outlets located on the west wall, you know, put a picture behind it, but you can put terms like that in there. Okay, so this gives you blank lines. If you don't have enough room, you could always say, see attached addendum number 1. Okay, here, you could write that here if this is way too short for you, but you shouldn't have that many extra terms. It's usually going to be about rental abatement or little items that the landlord has agreed to do upon delivery of the unit. Okay, like maybe new plugs, maybe add a light somewhere, things of that nature. Okay. So the following supplement is attached. This is an option to buy, and I'll briefly show you that at the end. I've never checked this on a lease, but at any rate, it's there for you, and I'll show you the CAR form on that. Attorney fees, if any action proceeding arising out of this agreement, it's telling you here, the prevailing party between landlord and tenant shall be entitled to reasonable attorney fees and costs from the non-prevailing party. So entire contract in all real estate, all prior agreements between landlord and tenant are incorporated in this agreement. We don't have any verbal, so this contract constitutes the entire contract. So if there was anything said verbally or anything like that, you have to put all your terms in this contract. This is your contract, okay? So make sure that all the terms, if you have additional ones that aren't covered above, are in here or on an addendum, okay? Agency confirmation, you're always going to do your agency disclosure as we showed you at the beginning of the lease, but you're going to also reconfirm it here. The listing agent, right here, they work for the landlord exclusively or both, and the selling agent here, they work for the landlord or the tenant, or they're dual. So make sure this is also filled out. And it also reminds everybody that we're not parties as real estate brokers to the agreement between the tenant and landlord. Now here is a nice box that landlord and tenant acknowledge and agree that brokers we do not guarantee the condition, and we cannot verify any representations made by other or verify zoning, etc. So read this box. It's a nice box that the CAR attorneys have added for us. And at the end here, it says landlord and tenant agree that they will seek legal, tax, insurance, and other desired assistance from appropriate professionals. We are their real estate agent. We do not give legal advice, tax advice, or insurance advice. So the tenant's going to sign the lease here. The tenant always signs first. Do not have the landlord sign unless you have your cashier's check in hand. Most landlords wouldn't do that anyway, but you always make sure when the landlord is executing that you have that cashier's check, all money in, that is due on this lease agreement. And once the landlord has the money in hand, they can sign the agreement. Then you can return a copy. Do not return a copy without all money in hand via cashier's check. So here's what we were talking about, the guarantee. So very important box. Sometimes people, it could be an individual, it could be an entity. Maybe the individual doesn't have a strong enough financial background, so they're going to bring in a different guarantor. But if it's an entity, please make sure that there's a guarantor on here, is just what we do. But check the box, make sure this is signed. I like wet signatures, but if it's not possible, you know, I guess you could get it on e-sign, but Shumay and I always try to get wet signatures on the documents, and we have 2 signed so that the landlord has 2 to sign, and we return a full set back with wet signatures back to the tenant as well. So at the end here, the landlord agrees to rent the premises on the above terms and condition. The landlord will sign it here, and it'll show the leasing firm here, our address, and the listing firm here. All of this should be completely filled in. Do not leave any of this blank. Make sure you've filled everything out here. Make sure the other agent gives you all of their information so you can put that in the lease.
Question.
Okay, come on up to the speaker. or I'll repeat it.
Can you go down, Michelle? Can you go
Up,
to
okay, we have a question.
the tenant? Just a number on the tenant.
Where?
Signature.
Signature,
The
yes,
tenant. There's only 2 spaces for the tenant.
right.
How about if we have 4 tenants?
If you have 4 tenants, what I've,
Okay.
or 3, what I've done before, I put an X, I'm gonna print tenant A, tenant B, I'm gonna put 2 names here, X, have them both sign, have them both date, and then another tenant down here. So you can print 2 names here, just make sure they sign above their name so it's crystal clear,
Gotcha.
okay?
That's it.
Any other questions before we move down to some other forms that I think are important? Okay, any comments, Ruben or Peter? Okay, so this is what we addressed in the, this is gonna automatically populate to the lease agreement. So the landlord states that the premise have or have not been inspected by CASP. Usually for us, it's been have not. So you're gonna fill this out and you're going to have the tenant and the landlord sign it. So if there's any repairs or modification necessary to correct violations of construction related accessibility standards to the premises, who's responsible, the tenant or the landlord? You have some outlined in 17, 18, and 19. I'll go back to those paragraphs to refresh your memory, but you want to make sure that you're filling that out. So 17, it's talking about maintenance and maintenance of roof foundation. So that's what they're referencing in here. But you want to make sure that you complete this form in its entirety as much as possible. Go over it with the landlord. I would be going over it before you're executing a lease. Just make sure that they have a pre-copy of this so you can be addressing it with them and filling it out properly. And then both the tenant and the landlord are going to sign. The main things that I've seen where there's accessibilities problems, or not problems, but things that could be corrected prior to a tenant even getting in, is on the LOIs. As I mentioned last week, we always put in that the landlord delivers like the retail unit with an ADA compliant bathroom if there's one in there. So that's the main thing that I've seen with accessibility. Of course, there's other things, but I'm always on track with the ADA bathrooms because those can be extensive to do, and they could be expensive. So the landlord will know if it's ADA compliant, and you can ask in your LOI for that, okay? So this automatically populates. This is the California Consumer Privacy Act disclosure notice. You know, on this, because it is required in our system and it's a civil code requirement, I always have the tenant and the landlord, even if I had the landlord sign during the listing, I'll still have them sign here again. I'll have a tenant line and a landlord line so that I just have it nice and clean and attached to the lease and everybody signed it, okay? So as you know, the property management property management advisory, we went over this before, but it bears repeating. You put in the address. We're not property managers. We want everybody to sign it. We want the landlord to sign it. And we want the tenant to sign it. We will be adding a line. So landlord's going to sign it, tenant's going to sign it, and agent. This is just advising that we don't do property management. We're the real estate agent, not the property manager. This is a required document for the brokerage. So please make sure you're printing that out. It can be found on our website. So I was asked about invoicing last week and how you get paid. So it's a little bit different on leases. So I'm giving you a simple example of an invoice of how Shumay and I do it. So we do it on letterhead. Here's our return address. We date it, put our corporate number here, and we put the agent who's ever involved and their DRE number. Lease to XYZ Corporation, lease commission items, we put the address here. So it's a simple Excel spreadsheet, and make sure that you are outlining everything here. 1 month, even the prorated days, outline that. This is all tabulated, it's Excel. If you have free rent, make sure you're expressing it here. Come down here. put all the amounts in, because this is probably going to be a step up because there's going to be raises in the rent. So make sure you complete the entire invoice. This is going to calculate the total due. Make sure that you tell them over here where to send the check, and it's payable to Coldwell Banker George Realty. So if you are cooperating with another agent, another brokerage, not a Coldwell Banker George Realty, that would make us dual. But if there is another brokerage involved, another agent, we cannot pay them out until they provide us with their W-9. So it's very simple. You just ask the other agent, send them a quick email or give them a quick call and ask them to email us their W-9. And then you turn that in, you know, to our accountant, or excuse me, you can give it to Anna, and they will put that into the system, because we can't pay commission to another brokerage without a W-9. So when you are cooperating, you obtain that W-9. Once the check comes in from the landlord, the company will deposit it to our bank, Coldwell Banker George. We will clear the check. We'll make sure the check is clear. And then we will cut the check according to your instructions, how that check is split. So maybe this is 50-50, you know, so you're going to write a simple note to turn into the system of how the commission will be split. And then you're going to also attach the W-9 for accounting. Okay. So there is another form that I printed out from our system. I know that the landlords we work with, they work off of an invoice. This is how their preference is. But if your landlord is willing to submit this way, the total move-in amount due from the tenant per the lease is, I don't know, $10,000. Commission for listing broker, commission for selling broker, and then the balance due of that check to the landlord. So there's 3 cashier's check that would come in, totaling this amount. So in all the years I invoice, because that's what our landlords prefer. So it's landlord preference on that. But if the landlord agrees to that, you can have it split into 3 different cashier's check. Okay, and then the landlord needs to sign this that they concur with that. Okay, so you either have an invoice or you use this form, instructions for lease check. And that can be found on Coldwell Banker George Realty website as well. So last week I was asked about the certificate of liability insurance. You always want to be moving on that. On behalf of your landlord, you want to make sure that you're requesting it and making sure that before the tenant turns the key on that door, that the certificate of liability insurance has already been turned in. This will be an annual certificate of liability. They're going to have to do this annually. That will be the landlord's responsibility to collect it. This is the guy here, Stephen Ma, who made the certificate of liability. You notice I've blanked out all of the insured information, but you put he'll put the tenant name and address here, and then he'll check commercial general liability, and then the limits of the policy here. Okay, so you don't need to be an insurance expert. What you need to do is make sure that you obtain the certificate of liability insurance and turn it over to the landlord so they can review it and make sure it's what they expected. And then the certificate holder right here, the landlord is going to be named as an additional insured. So they're going to be here. Now I asked the insurance agent about this, and they said if this certificate, because I said, how would they know if there's insurance? So it's great to add them here, because let's say the tenant didn't renew this policy. Who's ever in the certificate holder box will also be notified that the policy wasn't renewed. So I talked to State Farm to ask them that question. So this is what a certificate of liability insurance looks like. Peter, do you have anything to add on this? Ruben?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, so I have this typed up, types of commercial leases. This was a fabulous article written by someone February 1, 2022. I can't pronounce the name because it's quite a lengthy name. But if you need a copy of this, I like this. I keep it in my desk because I want to know that I'm understanding what each lease type is. So if you need a copy of this, I'm happy to share it. It's just my cheat sheet that I've typed up so that I understand what they're talking about when they call out certain types of leases. Like if you're representing a tenant and you don't understand what the lease is, here's a little cheat sheet. Or if you further don't understand it, please ask management before you commit your tenant to it. So make sure you understand what the lease type is. This is my cheat sheet that I typed up for myself. If you guys want a copy, I'm happy to share it. Okay, so is there any questions? Okay. So I am going to turn it over to, I'm going to show you the option agreement real fast that was referenced at the back end of that lease. Option to buy agreement. I've never used this, but they do have a checkbox for it in case a tenant has an option to buy. So I just wanted to show you the form briefly. Here it is, an option to buy. Okay, and that can be checked into the agreement if that is the case.
Okay, I have question. I mean, I have comment on the option to buy.
Okay.
If you're representing the buyer, be very cautious of advising him the option to buy, or and also if you're representing the seller, it's even more important to advise him the pitfalls of the option to buy. For the landlord, it's not a very good deal for the landlord, because at any time you want to sell the property, you have to ask first of all that the buyer has the option to first right of refusal to buy the property, and then by the time that you deal with the prospective buyer, in terms of you have to get the permission for the tenants, and it takes a long time, and also you have to follow certain steps, and by the time that you want to ascertain the first right of refusal, the prospective buyer will get frustrated and not want to go through the process. So I usually don't advise the landlord to give the option to buy for the tenant. So but if you do, I mean, if the buyer really insists, then you have to talk to the landlord, what the repercussions is and what the risk that he's taking. That's what I have to comment on.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you
Very
so
careful.
much. Yeah, is there any other questions? Because I'm going to stop the recording. We're going to go over a couple of things that has come up during the week that people are curious about. Before I stop the recording, I want to let you know that this is the last training for the year. So I wish you all very happy holidays, and it's been my great privilege to learn with you and grow with you, because by training and teaching, I grow a lot, I read a lot, and I ask Peter a lot of questions, as well as Ruben. So thank you all. It's been a pleasure. Please hold on. We're going to stop the recording. Any other comments, Ruben and Peter?
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes,
And
Joseph.
yeah, as casinos, I have a lease issued. One buyers asked me, how much percentage to keep the bed.
Okay, well, yes, we have a list of questions. Joseph, yours is at the top of our list. We're gonna address that. Just hold tight. I have that written down. We're gonna address your question. So we will sign off, and please stick around for an open question and answer session.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Okay.